Okay, here we are again, PDX. We got some new bathrooms open and we're off on a day trip, off to LA, see Bob Gale talk about Back to the Future in Santa Barbara and then back tonight. Let's go.
So listen, I am thrilled and honored to welcome these Hollywood legends, Bob Gale and Billy Zane.
Woo!
Look at these. Is there an auction later? Holy cow. I've seen a few of them before. Oh, goodness gracious. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, friends. Thank you, lovely town of Santa Barbara. Jump right in, shall we? Great to see you, as ever. And Bob, it's been a pleasure to speak with a writer whose work feels both complete.
Wait, before we start, maybe some of you don't know this, but Back to the Future was Billy Zane's film debut.
Thanks to you.
It's true. He had one line in the movie that got cut.
I think I got to say shit, though.
Oh yeah, you did get to say
Scream it a couple times.
So we brought him back. We made up for it a little bit in part two. But it's ironic that Billy would play Marlon Brando because this is a fun story. Biff's other two goons, they were always trying to figure out how are we going to get girls. They were always trying to look at the extras. And one of the tricks that they used was they said, see that guy over there? That's Marlon Brando's nephew, Billy. I don't know if it worked.
They did that? I never do that. Friends, I tell you. It's gracious. No, it was, I'll add a little weird footnote. I believe I got that job because I wore a Jetsons t-shirt to the audition, knowing that it would hint to my understanding of the retro sensibilities you were going for, the whimsy of Hanna-Barbera. It was just like, sometimes, I remember a quote by Jack Nicholson, which is, you gotta let the clothes do the talking. Performance and certainly in an audition.
If that story's not true, it should be.
And I thought, you said, well, you referenced it. I remember it completely on my first day of set. It was like, I really liked that t-shirt. And I was like, yes, that worked, it landed. It landed. As I was saying, the work feels so complete and inevitable. It feels like this film always was, as it's part of our DNA and fabric. Let's begin before that certainty, when it was just an idea on the page. Just paint a picture of those early moments, if you can.
One of my literary heroes is Ray Bradbury. And when I was a sophomore at USC, Ray Bradbury came to speak, and that's how I knew that I picked the right school, because any school would have, first 2 or 3 weeks of school, they have Ray Bradbury come and talk. That's the place I ought to be. And Bradbury said something really that I've never forgotten, which is trying to come up with an idea is like trying to behead the Medusa. If you face the problem straight on, you turn to stone. But if you creep up on it sideways, you just might nail it. And so that's such a beautiful analogy, and I think it's true, because I get ideas when I'm not thinking about getting an idea. And that is certainly the long and interesting story of how the idea for Back to the Future happened. Bob Zemeckis and I have been flirting with the idea of doing a time travel movie for for many, many years, and we could never figure out the hook. It was going to be called Professor Brown Visits the Future, and it was all going to be this retro future thing. It just was not working. We couldn't figure out the hook. This was in the mid to late 70s. In the summer of 1980, I went back to St. Louis, where I was born and raised, to promote used cars, which Trace mentioned. And there had been some serious flooding in the Midwest, and our basement had flooded. So my father hands me this box, and he says, "Son, I salvaged all this stuff from the flooded basement. I don't know if any of it's worth keeping. Go through it and see if there's anything that we should save." In it was my dad's high school yearbook. I'd never seen it before, and interestingly, I attended the same high school my dad did. So I thought, oh, this would be cool. Let's see what my high school looked like in the year 1940. So I'm thumbing through it, and I find out that my dad had been the president of his graduating class. I'm looking at this President Mark Gale. I'm looking at this photo of my dad. He's looking very, straight and political and all that shit. And I'm thinking about the president of my graduating class who was an asshole. So I thought to myself, wow, if I went to high school with my dad, was he that guy? Would I have been friends with my dad? That was it. That was the eureka moment, the bolt of lightning moment, where I said, that is the time travel movie that Bob and I have to write. So when I came back to California, I told Bob this story. He got real excited, and he said, and what if your mom went to the same high school? And what if all the things she said she never did? She did. And it turned out that this was, surprisingly, when we add in the next part of the story, it was the easiest pitch meeting we ever did. We went back to Columbia Pictures, where we had made used cars, and the president of Columbia, the late Frank Price, great executive, great man, had told us, when you guys come up with your next idea, come to me first. I want to be in business with you again. So we started telling the story to Frank, and Frank got it instantly. And Bob and I, we developed a whole bunch of other scenes and, kind of an outline for it. And Bob wanted to keep on talking. I could go, shut up, he's buying it, he gets it. And I think it was like a 90 seconds into the pitch where Frank said, let's do this. And we got this deal to write, well, it was then called an Untitled Zemeckis and Gale project at Columbia Pictures. This was around September in 1980. We wrote 2 drafts for Columbia, and they didn't want to make it. They said, it's very nice, it's very sweet. We think the market is going in a different direction. We think the market is going towards raunchier comedies, so we're going to pass on this. But what they do, and I assume they still do this, is they do what's called put the project in turnaround. And what that means is that they give the project back to the writers or the producers and say, go set this up someplace else, with the understanding that if it's successfully set up someplace else, the second company will repay the first company the money that they already spent. So it's a win-win for everybody. Nobody's going to be more passionate about trying to get the movie made than the guys that write it. And if the studio can get their money back, they're not going to do what we're doing, running around saying, we've got this great script. And they'll say, if it's so fucking great, why didn't you make it? Right? So we went around Hollywood with the second draft of Back to the Future, and we got rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected over 40 times. Now, granted,
That's one a year,
what?
in terms of the history, right? We're a 40-year-old.
We're in
our 40th year,
we're
that's a rejection.
1981. Yeah.
Back to the Future.
1981. And the two reasons that we're being rejected, one of them was the reason that Columbia rejected. The other one was time travel movies don't make any money, which at the time was a true statement. We could not argue with that. We understood that when they say that, okay. But everybody would say, you know, it's nice and sweet. You guys want to take this to Disney. Well, Disney at that time was before Michael Eisner took it over and kind of reimagined it, if you will. And they were making classics like The Black Hole and Condor Man and Herbie Goes to Hawaii, or I don't know, all those Volkswagen movies. Disney was the last place we wanted to go. But, all right, and then final Hail Mary. We've been every place else. What if everybody's right? What if Disney's the best place for this? So we go to Disney. We walk into this executive's office. His name was Tom Wilhite. Tom looks at us and he says, "You guys out of your mind to think Disney would make a movie like this? A movie about incest? You've got the kid and his mother in the car. We're Disney. We don't do that here." So that was the end of that. So we were surprised but also relieved because that was the last place we wanted to make the movie. Well, Bob Zemeckis was getting cabin fever and had to direct something, and he said to me, "You know, Bob, we put another picture in development, and that didn't happen." He said, I'm going to direct the next decent script that comes along. And that next decent script was called Romancing the Stone. Michael Douglas had been a big fan of used cars, loved the movie, thought Bob was the right director for it. He was correct. Romancing the Stone becomes a big hit. And then everybody and his uncle wants to be in business with Bob Zemeckis. Bob, what movie do you want to make? Bob, what movie do you want to make? What movie do you want to make? I want to make Back to the Future. But there was one guy that always liked the script named Steven Spielberg. And we didn't go into business with Steven back in 1981 because we'd done 3 projects with Steven, none of which had done well at the box office. And we were worried that if we did another one, maybe, and it failed, maybe we'd never work again because people would only think of us as those guys that only work because their buddy Steven gives them a job. And we told that to Steven. We were totally candid about it. He said, "You're right. That's what they would say. That's exactly what they would say. But if you change your mind, call me." And so Steven had just made E.T. He'd set up Amblin Entertainment at Universal. And his new office at Universal, we were the first movie to be produced as an Amblin Universal picture.
Before the film was made, the script had evolved through a lot of drafts, right? You said it was the second draft that you were shopping. Did that change by the time you got to Steven's approval? Or his,
No, the second draft was the one that was the one that everybody said yes to. But before we actually got a green light to really make the movie at Universal, we had to do another rewrite. And the guy at Universal that we dealt with was actually the president of MCA named Sid Sheinberg. Sheinberg was always the guy who was involved with Steven's projects. So we had a creative meeting with Sheinberg, and first thing he said was, in the first draft, the name of Marty's mother was Eileen. I named her after a girlfriend of mine in high school. In the second draft, we changed her name to Mary Ellen, because that was the name of Bob's wife. In the third draft, Spielberg said, you got to change your name to Lorraine, because his wife's name was Lorraine. And that was Lorraine Gary, who plays Roy Scheider's wife in Jaws. So you can put a face to the name. So that was fine. That was not a problem. One of the other things that Spielberg asked us to do, in the first two drafts, Doc did not have a dog. He had a chimpanzee. And in honor of Bob and my love for the Three Stooges, his name was Chimps. And Spielberg said, no chimps. No chimps. I looked it up, movies with chimps don't make any money. And I said to him, Clint Eastwood just made these two movies, Every Which Way But Loose and Any Which Way You Can. And he has a simian co-star, and those were big hits. And he looks at me and he says, that, sir, was an orangutan. So Chimp the Chimps.
No Chimps. Lance
Chimp the
Lee.
Chimp became Einstein the dog.
He probably produced Lance Lee's Secret Chimp, if I'm not mistaken. It was a huge hit on TV, if you haven't seen it.
And then the other thing.
Yeah, what else?
Oh yeah, there were a few. Spielberg did not like the title. He did not like Back to the Future. He said, this doesn't make any sense. How can you go back to the future? So we just, we'll think about that one. So we'll think about that. Maybe we'll come up with a better title. So we go off and we rewrite the script. And one of the things that big changes was that in the first two drafts, the time machine was a time chamber which Doc built into a refrigerator. She carried around on the back of a pickup truck. And Bob Zemeckis came in the office one day and he said, I don't want to shoot all this stuff with Doc putting the refrigerator on the back of a pickup truck and driving it around. Doc would have been smart enough to make it mobile and build it into a car. I said, that's a hell of a good idea. And he said, what if the car was a DeLorean? Now, younger people don't even know that there was a real car, that the DeLorean was a real car. But if you're a little bit older, you may remember that it was brainchild of a guy named, coincidentally, John DeLorean. And the car was crap. It was way too heavy, underpowered. There were all kinds of scandals involved in it. There's lots of conspiracy theories about it. And if you're interested, there's a bunch of documentaries, a bunch of books about it. Nobody's quite sure what's true and what isn't. But the company went belly up in late 1981 or early 1982. And the FBI was after John DeLorean. The conspiracy theory says as a favor to Margaret Thatcher because he got 50 million pounds from the British government to build this factory in Belfast, and the British government was never going to get their money back. So Margaret Thatcher wanted to teach John DeLorean a lesson. Anyway, whatever the story is, that's the one I like because I'm a storyteller and conspiracies always make the best stories.
But you also love science, and it was the fact that the car had a stainless steel body played into your narrative, did it not?
Absolutely, absolutely. It played into our narrative, and it played into the narrative of the company going south because the car, stainless steel, is way heavier than automotive steel. So the Renault Volvo 6-cylinder engine that the stock car had, didn't have enough horsepower for a car that was 900 pounds heavier than it would have been. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The John DeLorean trial John DeLorean was arrested for trying to make this cocaine deal to save his car company. And by the time of summer 1984, when we're in pre-production, finally he's on trial. So he gets arrested in 1982, trials in 1984, and America was riveted to this narrative. On the news every night, they had the latest from the John DeLorean trial. So that is why we picked the DeLorean, because of its notoriety.
Not the gull-wing doors? Come on. The gull-wings. It's so cinematic.
It was so cool. I mean, and it's still cool. And the only other car at the time that had gull-wing doors was a Mercedes. But the Mercedes didn't look anywhere near as cool as the DeLorean. So it had to be the DeLorean.
And it had to go a particular speed, did it not?
88 miles per hour.
Leads into the cocaine narrative, I think. Characters are at the heart of the story, right? So in revising, how did they evolve? And did the characters shape the plot, or did the plot shape the characters?
Well, this is a great question, because I am always fond of saying that the three most important ingredients of a script, and this may apply to novels as well, apply character, character, and character. Because if your characters aren't interesting, you're going to lose the audience right away. And there's no better proof of that than the Jerry Seinfeld show. Because what's that show about? Nothing! It's about these characters. And the characters are so well drawn that, you know, you can have Jerry get his fortune at a penny-operated scale, and they could do a whole episode about that. I mean, these are brilliantly written characters.
They're based upon different schools of comedy, as I understood it. Like physical, there's jokes, there's, I can't,
Maybe.
I didn't
I don't know.
the pillars, but apparently they were in this, they were examples of different forms of delivering comedy, and when you, I guess, put that mixed together, inevitably something funny happens, no matter what you're doing, case in point.
So the characters evolved as we wrote them, although what Bob and I like to do is outline the entire story with index cards. One index card for each scene, and we pin them up on the wall. And the most important thing to figure out before you really get started is the ending. Under the theory that if you don't know your destination, how are you going to take a trip, and how are you going to know that you got there? So we are Nazis about trying to know where the story is going to go. I do know a writer who told me that when he starts writing, he never knows what the ending is, on the theory that if he doesn't know where the story's going, neither will the reader. Okay, maybe that works for him. I don't know, really. It strikes me that you're going to end up with a whole lot of loose ends. And we've seen TV series where they keep renewing it, and you say, my God, they shouldn't have renewed House of Cards past that third season. But they keep going, and pretty soon it just kind of goes all over the place because they didn't have an ending figured out. Anyway, that's why we believe in the ending, and we'll put the cards up, but not in chronological order, because there will be scenes that we think belong in this movie, in this story. So one of the first scenes we thought of was, wouldn't it be cool if Marty invents rock and roll in 1952? And I say 1952 because when we first started writing the script in September of 1980, it was 1982 to 1952. So we said, okay, yeah, that's great. Let's do that. But in order for him to invent rock and roll, we have to know that he can play rock and roll and that this is a passion of his. So this character aspect of Marty McFly was based on the idea of a scene that we thought, hey, Marty plays rock and roll for an audience which has never heard rock and roll before. So that becomes two scenes. A, Marty can play rock and roll in the 80s, and B, he invents it in the 50s. And the same was true with skateboard. So we thought, okay, what else could he invent? Skateboard. And so we thought of that, and then we said, okay, we got to show him skateboarding. So that's how that happened. We always knew, of course, that there had to be a scene where Marty goes back in time, and there has to be a scene when Marty comes back to the future. So those were two more index cards. And pretty soon, we started having this sort of checkerboard of scenes. We had this idea for this love story where Lorraine falls in love with her son instead of the man she's supposed to marry. So we had to carve that out and figure that out. And that's how we do an outline. And then the cool thing about having it on index cards and on a cork board is you can move the scenes around. You say, well, maybe this scene should come later. Maybe this scene should come earlier. Or we need to move this scene down a little bit because we need an extra scene in here. And you don't see that until you can see the whole story laid out like that on the board. So as we do that, things are happening with the characters to say, okay, why would he do this? Why would he do that? And you have to add that.
And then when you start shooting, all those things change.
All those things change.
Because there probably are late stage revelations or complications or seeming limitations, which I like to refer to as beautiful accidents. If you can make lemonade, and you would have never arrived at a destination had this not occurred. On the day, you feel like you're blindsided, but then out of necessity, something happens.
Yes. So many of you know the story that we shot Back to the Future 5.5 weeks with the wrong leading man. We shot 5.5 weeks with Eric Stoltz because the aforementioned Sid Sheinberg believed that Eric Stoltz, thanks to his excellent performance in the movie Mask, would be able to be Marty McFly. We didn't really think that, but Sheinberg was so insistent on this that he finally said to us, I am so certain that Stoltz is going to be great that if he's not, you can reshoot the whole movie with somebody else. Now, you have to be arrogant to run a studio, and that can be good and that can be bad. You have to have a certain amount of arrogance to run anything. I mean, you know, our president is very arrogant. Steve Jobs was one of the most arrogant CEOs in existence. If you read Walter Isaacson's biography, my God, the guy was really arrogant. But sometimes arrogance gets you through. And Sheinberg was so arrogant that he said, I'm so certain that you can shoot it again. Now, he never, of course, thought we would call him on it. But when Bob Zemeckis had assembled 5 weeks of footage and it wasn't funny enough, and he called me and he called Steven and he called Frank Marshall and Kathy Kenny and Neil Cannon, the other producers, in to see this footage, we all agreed this ain't working. And we'd always wanted Michael J. Fox, couldn't get him out of his TV series. But once we all saw it, we delayed shooting several, I think 2 months maybe, in hopes that we could find the right guy. When we saw this, it was clear to us that we couldn't make this movie this way. So Stephen gave us excellent advice. He said, find the guy you want to recast before you tell Sid, because you don't want to shut the movie down and then he might not start it up again. So we went back to the producer of Family Ties, Gary David Goldberg, a wonderful man. And I think we literally got down on our knees. And it was much later in the production now. One reason we couldn't get Michael back when we were starting was Meredith Baxter Burney, his TV mom, was pregnant at the time. Michael was carrying the show. She'd had her baby, she was back on the show. Gary said, if Michael wants to do this, and you guys will shoot around our TV schedule, and you guys work at night and we get him in the day. Okay. Now, this is fucking insane. Today they would never let you do it. They'd lock you up. But things were a little bit looser in the 80s. And we said, yeah. And Michael J. Fox said, yeah. And Universal said, well, okay. And that is how we shot a large portion of the movie, as you remember.
It was my maiden voyage. It was my first time on a set of that size, and to get a do-over was unheard of. You know? It's like, oh, it's like, you know, sometimes you can get another take. You don't get another movie, right? We go get another movie. Can I get another one? No, another 5 weeks. That'd be great. I just want to see what I can do with this now. Eric was wonderful and a fantastic actor and a lovely man. And as I remember, you know, people say, you know, Steven's take on it was, you know, we had a Jimmy Stewart, we needed Bob Hope, was the line I heard. And, you know, and he wasn't, it's not inaccurate, you know, both fine actors, but tonally, I think to deliver the movie, you know, Michael nailed it. And how he did both of those jobs, the demand, you know, I don't even know. But
it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It just,
and SAG let him, which was great. But, and I want to add a caveat or another extension to that initial question about the things that change. Now, casting, certainly a change. Also, locations and set pieces.
Yes. So, the original ending of the movie was way different. The DeLorean is nuclear powered. And Bob and I were fascinated by the fact that the United States government did all these nuclear tests out in the Nevada desert. And they built these fake towns to see what an atomic blast would do to a town. They erected these full-size towns with cars, parked cars on the street, furniture, kitchens, refrigerators, everything in these towns, and they blow them up. There's a documentary called The Atomic Cafe, which has a lot of footage of this stuff. And a movie that we saw when we were kids, which is one of the most perverse movies ever made, called The Atomic Kid with Mickey Rooney. And the premise of this movie is that Mickey Rooney and his pal are out in the desert prospecting for uranium. Because back in the 50s, if you found uranium, you know, you were set for life. And they wander into this fake town. They don't know what it is. How come nobody's in this town? How come nobody's in this town? And the bomb drops. And they both survive. And Mickey Rooney ends up with superpowers. And it's so fucked up. It's so insane. And he, you know, he sets off Geiger counters wherever he goes. I haven't seen the movie in decades. If you watch Back to the Future again, you'll see the movie playing at the end of the street where Marty drives to is the Atomic Kid. So anyway, when Universal says we've turned in our budget, and usually whatever your budget is too high. No exception here. They said, cut $1 million out of this budget if you want to make this movie. Okay, well, we want to make the movie. how are you going to cut $1 million out of this budget? The most expensive thing in the script is building this town, this nuclear test site thing. So we thought, you know, if we can do something else and do it on the back lot where we are already building Hill Valley, that would save us $1 million like that. So Bob and I spent a weekend wandering around the town square in Hill Valley trying to figure out how can Marty get back to the future off of the town square. And we came up with the clock tower, which didn't exist. There was no clock on the courthouse. And if you watch To Kill a Mockingbird, you can see the Universal Courthouse without the pediment on top. We said, let's put a clock on there and let's have lightning hit it. And that turns out to be 1,000,000 times better than driving out, having him have to drive out to Nevada. So this is a case of having limits on your creativity forces you to become more creative.
It's so much better. You know, you have obviously the element of time present. It plays to a kind of a Franklin early level of science. It touches on science because you're using electricity, of course, the practicality, but narratively the payoff and visually the payoff is just so much more dynamic. And you remove the you know, the pallor, the kind of bleak cloud layer of atomic age. You know, it's grim. It's not joyous or interesting. But it's interesting that Steven brought it back in Indiana Jones with a crystal skull. He got to do it in the end.
Nuke the fridge.
He opened it up.
Where did that come from? Now you know.
Yeah, I got it. I never go. Connected dots, you see? Ah, Amblin. Funny. You've been deliberate in preserving the integrity of this title and brand. From your writer's perspective, what made you feel the story was complete? And how did you decide to leave it as it is? I mean, there's a certain point where you just kind of go, we got to stop. Or otherwise, well, limitations were imposed upon you, but it could, you know, I mean, perhaps in the first iteration, not in the sequels, because you're not going to keep writing sequels, to your point about a series that drifts into the oblivion. But what was the? You remember the moment that it was like, we got it?
Well, here's what happened. So Bob and I make Back to the Future, and of course, people say, "Oh, you must have known this was going to be a hit." No, hell no. You never know if a movie's going to be a hit unless it's a sequel to something that was already a hit that people can't wait to see. You know, everybody knew, or based on a giant bestseller. I mean, everybody knew everybody was going to go see Harry Potter. Everybody knew that the Dan Brown book, The Da Vinci Code, that everybody was going to go see that. Everybody figured, oh yeah, they're going to go see The Godfather. That was a giant bestseller. But Back to the Future, what the hell's that? Is anybody going to go? We didn't know. So people say, well, you guys must have known you were going to do a sequel because of the ending of that movie. And we said, well, no. The ending of that movie is very satisfying. The heroes go off into the sunset for another adventure. It's classic. And Bob Zemeckis has always said, if we knew we were doing a sequel, we would have never had Jennifer get in the car. Because when we finally went to write the sequel, the big question was, what are we going to do about Jennifer? Because she was not a very well-developed character. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So we make this movie and we think it's just fine, and it's a big hit, and it's great, and we're happy. And Steinberg says, let's talk about the sequel now. And remind me to go back to the title story. So Steinberg says, let's go back to this, let's talk about the sequel. And Bob and I said, sequel? Where we're going, we don't need sequels. This movie doesn't need a sequel. And Sid said, gentlemen, let me explain this to you. And he always would say, gentlemen, there will be a Back to the Future Part 2. You can either be on the bus or off the bus. And Bob and I looked at each other and said, all right, if those are our two choices, we're going to go with number 3. We drive that fucking bus. But we said, look, our condition is this. We have to have Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. Because if we don't have both of those guys, there's no way we can come up with a sequel. And to his credit, Sid said, you are correct. We absolutely have to have those two guys in the sequel. And being incredibly prescient, arrogant, or I don't know what, Sheinberg made deals with Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd not only for Back to the Future Part 2, but for Back to the Future Part 3. And we weren't thinking about anything. We had no story, we had nothing. But he made these deals, okay? So when it came time to actually think about doing a sequel, you know, we went to Michael and Chris first, and they said, well, if you guys are doing it, yeah, sign us up. So we knew we had Michael and Chris. And then, of course, the next question that we asked ourselves, because we hadn't really been thinking in terms of sequels, what do people want to see in a sequel? Well, they want to see the characters that they loved so much from the first movie. Right. So let's ask Leah Thompson, will you come back? And she said, Michael and Chris are in it, and you guys are running it? Yes. And we went to Biff, Tom Wilson, and he said the same thing. And we went to Crispin Glover, and he said... So, again, how do limitations shape what you write? When we began figuring out what Back to the Future Part 2 was going to be, we wrote it with the belief that Crispin was not going to be in the movie. And so George McFly is a tombstone in Back to the Future Part 2 because of that. And we didn't have any story at all. But we said, we've got Marty, we've got Doc, we've got Lorraine, we've got Biff, and what about George? Well, George's going to have to be dead. Okay, let's make that part of the story. How did he die? What's that all about? So those limitations got us to the point of saying, and again, thinking back of the little throwaway things that we did in Part 1, where you always see Biff, you know, he's got the hots for Lorraine. So let's do a warped version of 1985 where Biff actually marries Lorraine. And that's between Crispin not doing the movie and that those little bitty bits that you see in the first one. That's how that story comes about.
Pottersville, right?
Pottersville, yes. And of course, yes, glad you brought that up because It's a Wonderful Life is one of Bob and my favorite movies. If you aren't familiar with it, get familiar with it. It's Frank Capra's crowning achievement. And since we're talking about all the serendipity and all the weird things that happen, the reason that movie is such a part of people's consciousness today was purely by accident. Because Capra made the movie in 1946. He started an independent company called Liberty Films. They couldn't get a good distributor. It tanked at the box office. Liberty Films shortly thereafter went out of business and nobody renewed the copyright. So now we've got television, and the television networks and stations are saying, What can we put on that's not going to cost us anything? Hey, It's a Wonderful Life. It's out of copyright. We can put that on. There was a channel in Los Angeles called the Z Channel that ran movies. If you've been around a long time, you might know about that. And they, I think, might have been the first ones to start running that. And then people start discovering that. And then NBC starts running it, and it becomes a big deal. They put it out on home video. They don't have to pay any royalties. And that's why this accident, this clerical error, if somebody renewed the copyright on that, we might not know that movie.
It wouldn't be part of our Christmas fabric, like the
Exactly.
Grinch or, the
Exactly.
claymation, it's so intrinsic. It's like...
And these things are so fascinating, these little accidents that just shape everything that we
It's
do.
the cornerstone of cinema filmmaking, in my opinion. I think if you hold the thread of service and purity of heart, if your intention is to make a great film, borrowing from the Capra playbook, and the love of entertainment and the love of service or functional media, since the Greeks, it's like, how does this advance culture? How do we, what's the point of this story? Sure, with fart jokes and everything else that Aristophanes had, but make it humanist, but what's the objective? If you hold that function, which I feel this film, the reason Back to the Future resonates is because it speaks to familiar things, yet fantastical things.
It's a human story.
It's a human story.
And that's, people say, well, Back to the Future is a time travel movie, right? No, it's not. Time travel is an element.
It's a family.
It's a story about this family. Exactly. And everybody can relate to that. Because, around the time you're 6, 7, 8 years old, and all, the first several years of your life, you're hearing your parents say, oh, when I was your age, and you're 7 years old, and you're saying, what? What do they mean when they were my age? My parents are gods. They were always here. And then suddenly there's this epiphany that you have, probably maybe because you have a sibling, or you suddenly realize, why don't my clothes fit? Oh my God, my parents once, they actually were my age. That's a cosmic thing. They had a first date. What did they do on their first date? Maybe we don't want to know. How did that happen? But everybody, every generation, in every culture, asks that question, and I think that is why Back to the Future is still with us. And I love to tie this idea, this human thing, into what I think is Shakespeare's most popular resonant play today, which I believe is Romeo and Juliet. I made so many movies of it. You can always say, yeah, we're going to put on a production Romeo and Juliet. What is the core thing about Romeo and Juliet? You boil it all the way down. My parents don't want me to associate with that person. That's it. And everybody has that in their life. Mom and Dad don't approve of my friends. Mom and Dad don't approve of my boyfriend. They don't approve of my girlfriend. Everybody goes through that. And that's the core thing about Romeo and Juliet. I think that's why it resonates with every generation, why it's been around for centuries, because we can all identify with it. Even if we don't completely understand all of Shakespeare's language, we get it. We get it.
So you mentioned Shakespeare and Bradbury. Who else were major influences for you? Who else did you read, and who stays with you, and what are you reading
Mark Twain,
now?
of course, is good American. I love, and from Missouri. I love Mark Twain's writing. Whenever I want to get excited about what you can do with the written word, Mark Twain is a go-to guy. And whether it's his novels or his essays or his nonfiction stuff, Life on the Mississippi is a masterpiece. I just love going back into that. As somebody who writes a lot of fiction, writes only fiction, I read a lot of nonfiction because your education never stops. So the more things that I can learn about, maybe something will trigger me into saying, there's a good idea. That's an idea, or that's something that I can use. So in terms of the nonfiction writers that I love, Eric Larson, God, he's so good. He's so good. He makes history feel like you're reading a novel. He comes out with a book and it's a blind buy for me. I'll just buy it. Science, Mary Roach. If you've never read her works, she's funny. She's sort of the spiritual successor to Carl Sagan, who can take scientific concepts and, she's got a much darker sense of humor than Sagan ever had, but her writing's great. Her style is absolutely great. I just started reading a book that somehow fell under my radar, Tunnel 29, about people escaping under the Berlin Wall, nonfiction. It's fabulous, fascinating, about 5 years ago. So yeah, so those are some books I can put a plug in. And another thing, for those of you that are interested in writing and the process of writing, there's a book that came out, 10, 15 years ago. It's called Daily Rituals. It's great. It's about, somebody surveyed 150 people, artists, writers, composers. What are your daily rituals? What do you do when you get up? How do you write? How do you paint? How do you do? And what is great about this is that everybody has a different process. So I always like to tell people, I cannot tell you how to write. I can only tell you how I do it. And any other writer, that's all they can do. And maybe some of the things, this business about outlining with cards, maybe that speaks to you, and that will help you if you're going to be a writer. Say, I think I'm going to try that. Gale said it'll work for him. Maybe it'll work for me. Maybe it won't. Sometimes I get I get stuck where I can't figure out what's going to happen. I just start writing the scene in the middle. And the characters are well written. The characters tell me what they're going to do. And I've had the characters get me out of scrapes before. So there's all different things that you can do, that people do. And what's hard about this in our world is to know that it's not an exact science or craft or anything. Because, yeah, okay, you can go learn how to cobble a pair of shoes. You can learn how to make a dress. Go get a pattern, this is how you do it. You don't actually get to learn how do you write a novel, how do you write a screenplay. It goes completely contrary to what we grow up with, which is, okay, do your homework, show up in school, get good grades, you'll get into junior high school, do the same thing and get into a good high school, you'll get into a good college, get a degree, everything's going to work out for you. Not necessarily. So, I went to USC cinema. Nobody's ever asked me my degree. You can bullshit your way quite a lot in the movie business. You can bullshit your way through a whole lot, and people do it. And people can be successful doing it, and that's another lesson that they don't teach you. That you can survive on bullshit.
But you got to deliver.
At some point, you have to deliver. Because at a certain point, the dog ate my homework. Isn't going to cut it.
Now, you're delivering a new piece right now, right? You're releasing a new annotated script, if I'm not mistaken.
So, for those of you who are interested, which I hope is all of you, we are publishing the 4th draft shooting script of Back to the Future in October. There's handbills around somewhere. You can pick one up. And I've annotated it. So this is the first time, to my knowledge, that I went to a book company and said, we got to do this because nobody's ever done it before. The colored pages, it's printed 8.5 by 11, the regular real size of the script that the crew got. And facing each page are my notes about how we wrote the scene, or some storyboards, or some stills, something that enhance what the script page is. And these are my script pages. So you'll see my handwritten notes, handwritten dialogue in there, written on 2 different typewriters, because some stuff was typed on a manual typewriter, the thing that I had in my office, and some stuff was typed by my assistant or the universal typing pool, and that stuff, those pages look a lot better than my manually typed page. But I think it's a really interesting way for people to see the process of how a screenplay becomes a movie, and you'll see the deleted scenes. It's all in there. I mean, you get the annotated Godfather, which is great. No dispersions on that, but it's not really the script of the Godfather. They've kind of tailored it more to what the movie is. Better than the annotated Godfather, Coppola came out with the annotated Godfather novel, and he's got a page of the novel in the center of each page, and his handwritten notes are all around it. That was really instructive. That's something I highly recommend.
It's very generous. It's like a master class in your pocket,
You know, I
can't wait to read it.
I want to pass what I know on, because if I can do something that helps somebody in here become a better writer, that's good. That's good.
Thank you. How are we doing on time? We've kind of...
Keep going.
Huh?
Keep going.
Keep going. What's exciting you now? It just in theme.
Well,
plot.
here's what's one thing that I would be remiss not to talk about this. We turned back, so you asked me, how did you decide no more Back to the Future?
Well,
At the end of part 3, we put the end. We were never going to do a part 4. And Stephen backed us up on this, because we felt, okay, we weren't really that crazy about doing the sequels, but they turned out very, very well. But we wanted there to be closure. And your future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. I mean, you can't do better than that, right? It's the best way to close this thing out. Let the audience go live their own future. Yeah. So we said to Stephen, we don't want to do a 4th one. He said, I'll back you up on that. Then Michael J. Fox announces he's got Parkinson's. And so when people say to me, well, you got to do Back to the Future Part 4, I said, you want to see Back to the Future Part 4 without Michael J. Fox? No. Question asked, question answered. What we did do, however, was we decided to do Back to the Future, the musical. Played for 18 months on Broadway, played for almost 5 years in the West End. It's on tour in the US, played for a month at the Pantages in 2024. For those of you that didn't get to see it, we'll be in San Jose the first week of June. So backtothefuturemusical.com, you can get tickets and see it there. Eventually, I'm sure, we'll get it to the Granada over here. I don't know when that'll be, but the exercise, the craft, the challenge of taking this movie and putting it on stage was one of the best creative experiences I've ever had in my life. Now, I've talked a little bit about rejection. Rejection is such a huge part of the story of Back to the Future. And you say, well, okay, well, Bob, you made Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. Surely you don't get rejected anymore. Ah! Oh, yeah. So Bob and I are thinking, okay, Back to the Future the musical, it's got to be a slam dunk. People ought to be lining up around the block to be in business with us. They weren't. They would say, well, Back to the Future might make a musical. How are you going to do the DeLorean? And what makes you think you guys can do that? You've never done a musical before. Okay, you've never done a musical before? We have done Back to the Future before. Not good enough. So we spent years getting rejected by the Broadway establishment. And here's the irony. The producer who signed on and said, yes, Back to the Future is going to be a musical and I'm going to produce it. A British guy named Colin Ingram. Colin was 14 years old when he saw the movie. He was a fan. And I love our fans. I embrace fans because it's the fans that keep these things alive. That we touch people, and we touch people in so many different ways. John Mayer, the guitarist, he became a guitarist because of the Johnny B. Good scene. And I have people come up to me and they say, I decided to become a scientist because I saw Back to the Future. I decided to become a writer because I saw Back to the Future. I decided to become an actor. I decided I wanted to make costumes because of this movie. So you never know how something that you do is going to touch other people. So it touched Colin Ingram, and he becomes a British theater producer. And he says, hell yes, I want to make Back to the Future the musical. Hell yes, I want to work with Zemeckis Gale and Alan Silvestri and songwriter Glenn Ballard. And I don't care if they haven't done a musical before. They can learn that. And so there it is. The show's playing in Tokyo. It's playing in Hamburg, Germany. It's playing on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. Wow. I mean, think about this. You're on a cruise ship. You're watching Back to the Future, and the fucking car flies. In the middle of the ocean, right? It's insane. It's going on tour in the UK in October. We've got engagements set for 2027. So the future is going to be here for a long, long time.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank Bob for joining us today. I'd like to thank great love of this title. I'm a fan. Always have.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you.